you, Steve. Hello, everybody. I am Margaret O. Smith. I'm president of Atlantic Live, which is the Atlantic Magazine's live events division. And we do what we call Atlantic Exchanges, which are conversations around the city with really, really interesting people doing fascinating things. And we've talked to Mark Zuckerberg, we've talked to Bill Gates, we've talked to Penny Pritzker, closer to home.
And none of them are like tonight.
And Patty Stonecipher, who runs Martha's Table. And tonight we're so happy to add Evan Burfield to that list. Evan, as you all probably know, is the founder of 1776. I think he's something of a local hero. He helps fuel innovation in the city and around the globe, and to make entrepreneurial ideas come to life. And I think there's probably no better place to have this conversation that kind of has the spirit of entrepreneurship than in this brand new Shinola store. So it's so great. It's the first time I've been in a Shinola store. It's very cool. And thank you so much to Shinola for hosting us here, for making tonight possible. So before we toss to Evan and to my colleague Steve Clemons, who you all already know and met, I would like to introduce the Director of East Coast Community Relations, Tom Forrester, to say a few words. Tom?
Thank you. That was much easier said. Thank you all for coming. And I'm not going to talk long, but when I was 3, no, I'm just kidding. This is going to be your part. Thank you so much. 1776 has been nothing but great to us since we've been here. Open arms. And we're excited to have the Atlantic. This is going to be a great event. Again, I'm Tom Forrest, new to the city. Happy to be here. And our brand new spanking store, which is like a museum, you can touch everything. And I just want, on behalf of myself and the staff here, please make yourself at home. Say hello. Have a great time. And again, there's no other better place to have it than right here. You know, why do we make Washington, Detroit? That's a whole other story. But why not? They know how to make things. And I think that was part of the reason why we decided to go there. And we just wanted, the bottom line, we just want to make a good product. And I think it is. So please have a great time. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask any of us. All right? So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. And just a very, very fast note before we begin. A tweet about tonight. I have to make my notes. Use @Atlantic_live and the hashtag ATLX. Hashtag ATLX. And with that,
Fail.
What? Fail?
What's your hashtag?
Oh, what's your hashtag?
For your handle at 1776.
Oh, yeah,
At 1776. We call that live editing.
Yes.
Thank you, Steve.
Fail.
And
And I'm S.C. Clemons.
And I'm E. Burfield.
Yeah, E. Burfield. So.
I'm Angela Smith. Anyway, Steve Clemons, Washington editor, Large, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, boss. Nice to see you. See you later. Evan, thank you so much for joining us. And it's great to be with all of you tonight. I wanted to let the Shinola people know that when I walk out the door tonight, this is my watch. I did not put it on. This is not, yeah, this is I go, but I just want to put on the right, this is mine. Some others of you can negotiate your own way. Tonight, and thank you. We're going to have some fun. We're going to have a little bit of conversation here, and I really want to invite everyone to participate. This is an unusual venue for us, and my job is to, talk about innovation with one of the great innovators, I think, not only in this region but the world. Someone who's on the map with so many of America's iconic investors and innovators. I sent an email last night to Steve Case, whom I think is someone who changed the world for everyone. Alibaba and Jack Ma would have nothing without America Online. Steve is out there beginning a tour around the country with something called Rise of the Rest. We can talk about that a little bit later. But he was sharing with me how much admiration and respect he has for Evan Burfield and what he's done. And so thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for wearing your t-shirt where revolutions begin.
I look 30 now, so it's pretty.
So let me get right to it. Is 1776 more hype than real?
No, it's not. And I think if anything, a lot of people sort of have heard of the brand and they're engaged with the general idea that we work with startups and that we have an origin in DC. But I don't think, a lot of people really understand like the nuts and bolts every day of like, how do we help startups? How do we help large organizations that are trying to innovate? Like, how does all this work and what's involved in it? So I think if anything, we probably have more work to do to actually sort of explain to people like what we're doing, how we do it, why we think that's important.
So this is going to be messy, and I'm probably going to regret saying it later. Detroit, where Shinola is now bringing together craftsmen and reinventing things, started with a brand. You can buy the shoe. I know I need the shoe shine kit over here. Resurrecting that and trying to basically bring this. And a lot of people critique Shinola in an unfair way, in my view, saying, "Oh, here's a higher end product good for a town that's really desperately in need." But I imagined, what if DC didn't have politics? What would it look like? And it's interesting that maybe innovation, thinking about people, it might be in a similar circumstance. So what if, what is the link necessarily in Washington D.C. if this town didn't have the political scene, would you still?
I don't think you could, you're talking about a city that literally was created from whole cloth for political purposes. I don't think you can separate the two, and I don't think you should. It's just like, with Detroit, really, really central to our thesis for the work we do in DC, but also work we do around the globe with other startup communities, is the idea that you have to build your startup community from the assets that you already have. So in Detroit, right, as we just heard, Detroit makes things. Right? Detroit has this actually tremendous human capital of people who actually understand manufacturing and design, and industrial design, and art forms that are somewhat, were lost for a while, but are actually coming back into vogue. And so you should build a startup like Shinola in Detroit, right? That it makes sense.
Patterson, New Jersey was the first craftsman city that Alexander Hamilton said is going to be our city, and it was an amazing power. Why not set up there instead of DC?
So for us,
that would be more 1776-ish.
One of the key themes that we focus on is that, the way we phrase it, to be trite, is like Silicon Valley and DC are smashing together. What that means is that, we feel like we've largely picked a lot of low-hanging fruit for innovation in our lives as consumers, right? The number of things we can do with our iPhones and communicating with people and buying stuff and all these very consumer-oriented activities, it's mind-boggling how much that's changing. But if you still my wife's here in the audience, we live directly across the street, and we're having
Where is she?
We're having
Oh yeah.
So we're having our first child in like a week.
Congratulations.
Oh, really? Going through the process of having a kid, it's like pulling your hair out in terms of like, is this really still the way the healthcare system works? Like there is so.
Do you have a startup in 1776 that makes it easy?
Baby scripts, yes, that helps. They help. But we do actually. We do have startups that are like working on patient engagement between obstetricians and mothers, and how do we get data flowing, and how do we reduce risks, and how do we make this all better. But that's kind of the point. Like there's, in healthcare, in education, in financial services, in security, right? There's so many opportunities all around us to innovate. But that's not going to look like the kind of innovation we've had for the last 10 years. It's not going to look like I'm going to put an app on the App Store and it goes viral. And so we actually think that DC has a tremendous amount to learn from Silicon Valley, that Silicon Valley has a tremendous amount to learn from DC. And we don't mean that literally in the geographies, we mean that in terms of the culture of DC and the culture of Silicon Valley, which you can in fact find pockets of all around the world.
So I buy that they can learn from each other, and that's sort of an arbitrage, right? That's an arbitrage between a slow-moving and a fast. It's kind of like AOL and Time Warner, in a way, what you're describing DC and Silicon Valley, but no one laughed at that. So you obviously you did not own Time Warner stock when that happened.
Yeah.
But I guess the question is when you talk about mixing these cultures, one of them, and I've talked about this, DC is a very risk-averse town.
Oh yeah.
Right, so this is a town that's avoid risk, and Silicon Valley, or the West Coast of the United States, is all about risk.
Yep.
So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so you've got to unpack when you say Washington D.C. Washington D.C. has a whole bunch of different communities in one city, and from the very beginning, before we even started 1776, one of our theses was defragmenting all of those communities and linking them up was like part of what our mission needed to be. First for DC, and then to be able to sort of connect that all globally. Because if you think about it, there is a community of people in Washington, D.C. who made a tremendous amount of money through multiple generations investing in new technologies, right? You referenced Steve, if you look at the number of startups that we deal with today in 1776 who in some way link back on the family tree to AOL, it's pretty staggering, right? Maybe they were executives at Living Social that spun out to go start a new company, but you know what, Living Social was founded by Revolution. Yeah, all this. So we do have that. We have this pocket and history of innovation. Well, that's very different from the K Street nexus and the role of lobbying and all these corporations that kind of connect up here. Still a really valuable asset for us to think about, which is totally different from the role of government contracting, right? Which is its own thing that it's doing. And you've got the international communities, and you've got real estate wealth, right? You have all these different types of communities. And so for us, right, figuring out how do we tap into each one of those, how do we take the strengths of those, connect them up with each other, and then try to rewire that all around this idea of increasing the pace of innovation in the region was central to it. So how do you get the real estate money, which is relatively conservative, right? Investing in startups, well, you start to show them wins, right? You start to show them, and it's interesting, right? Because 2 years ago, your critique on DC was, well, you're starting to see activity again, but where are the big exits? Well, you had O-Power go public, you had 2U go public, right? Those are, particularly, 2U's been crushing it this year on the stock market, right? These are very successful companies. You have
To you, we interviewed Jim Shelton this morning of 2U, who's the Chief Impact Officer, and just went on the board of Revolution Foods, which is a Steve-based company, which you've been involved with.
So like, now
You really are the Wizard of Oz.
the point is, now you see in this region, even just went public, right? Now you're seeing the big wins, and that's starting to cause people going, well, wait a second, the seed investors in O-Power probably need 100 times their money, how do I get in on that? And that's kind of part of what you have to do, is like, focus your resources on getting the big wins. That's going to help to change culture. That's going to help get people aligned, and then you can use that.
So just to bring this in, how many of you have heard of O-Power? Okay, good. No, this is staggering. Okay, great. Alex Lasky lives in Columbia, just Navas, Oregon. We have coffee across the street. But it's unusual to talk about that sort of success here in regulation land.
But if you talk to Alex, right, he would tell you that he came to Washington specifically because they knew O-Power couldn't succeed without some regulatory play. So part of their market testing early on, and for those of you that don't know, O-Power, they have a lot of stuff now, but their sort of core product was they sell a service to utility companies which gives you an electronic utility bill that tells you how your energy consumption is comparing to all your neighbors for a comparable size house. This is shown to result in, on average, 3 to 5% reduction in power consumption if you do nothing else. Right? Pretty simple, straightforward product. What he figured out was they first market tested in California, and it was easy to sell. Right? All the utility companies in California, there were all these local co-ops, they were all on board. Then he intentionally went to Texas as the next market they market tested in, and part of the strategy there was they actually went to the Texas legislature, got a law change requiring utility companies to invest in this kind of technology, and that was the validation that they could really build a business around. In other words, you can't separate the innovation behind the product with the regulatory hacking strategy that made O-Power, what it is.
Regulatory hacking strategy.
Yeah.
That's a tweetable.
I've
never heard that.
But that's central, right? When we're working with startups in the Valley, and they're like, well, why should I work with 1776? And you're like, because we understand regulatory hacking unbelievably well, and if you are in the energy sector or the financial services sector, or you're dealing with healthcare, and you may or may not be an FDA-regulated medical device, you really need to understand how to work through these issues. You have to. And that kind of expertise is like just thick through Washington, D.C., right? You just haven't connected it up with people that are actually doing really important stuff with it before.
So, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. You are kind of like a surfer to me. You saw the wave before anyone saw it. You had some flops before the people said, who is this Evan Burfield guy? And you came in and you made this happen. I mean, right now, as you think about this, you think about what you've accomplished and done, when do you know you've made it? And how do you know that this was the right zone to invest your credibility in, your money in, bring people in? I mean, you only get so many times in the back, right? So,
well, I certainly don't think we've come close to accomplishing our mission yet. And probably part of that is the natural entrepreneurial instinct that says you're constantly expanding the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. But, you know, I was in Zimbabwe and Kenya a few weeks ago, meeting with entrepreneurs in their entrepreneurial community. And
it's kind of a big thing to drop on people. Zimbabwe and Kenya.
If you aren't, I mean, like, if you're, I'm on this band right now. If you're a VC and you really are looking for the next wave of big of big investment opportunities, and you're not
there too,
and you're and you're not focusing on like sub-Saharan Africa,
right.
fascinating technology startups coming out of sub-Saharan Africa right now. But the point is like the opportunity to help connect them, really great innovators solving really big problems with huge market potential, to connect them with like simple, basic resources and
Are
connections.
you investing in that?
Yeah.
Do they have rule of law that's good enough for you to invest in?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, how many of you guys have spent time in sub-Saharan Africa in the last few years? Yeah. Go there. I mean, it's actually in Nigeria or Kenya or certain countries, like, it's pretty amazing what they're doing. It's not what you would expect.
I feel like I'm in a National Geographic. Everybody's been there. Yes. I have not yet. That's interesting that, because when you look at this kind of broader question, and one of the questions is, you know, and I asked the issue of law, right? Because, you know, a lot of reasons why a lot of foreign money is coming here is because of the fear of corruption, the fear of, you know, winners being chosen, you know, the lack of innovative space. So you're saying globally,
But if you look at startups like if you look at a startup like Pesa was actually a spin out from Party. If you look at stuff like that, that's a business valued at several $100 million that is much more advanced in terms of mobile payments than anything we have in the US, Apple Pay notwithstanding. Like, that's fascinating. And the opportunity to leapfrog multiple, like, entire generations of technology is very, very powerful if you're looking at it from a venture standpoint. But I can use the same example of there's a startup in Dubai, and also in the Middle East, and lots of Middle East, and there's a startup in Dubai that's like figured out a technology that allows you to pretty rapidly reduce the oxygen content in a room below 16%. Why is this relevant? Because humans can still breathe it, but fire can't get started. Right? So if you think about a data center or a
living on thin air.
Living on thin air. Rather than install a sprinkler system to deal with something that arises after the fact, you literally just bring the oxygen content down below the point at which a fire can start in the first place, and you have a safe environment. Like, that technology could have been started anywhere. It happened to be started in Dubai, but it's still really interesting technology that's frankly totally relevant to a whole lot of businesses in the DC region, right? Like, how can we help to make that connection to get better technology here to increase the pace of innovation and help a startup in Dubai to scale faster?
So I don't want to make this about our host tonight, Shinola, but I am really deeply interested in Shinola because I've met the president of Shinola, Steve Bach. I interviewed Steve on a Rise of the Rest tour with Steve Case. He is a profoundly dramatic South African accent. He is not from Detroit. And he was, you know, came in to do this, but he's such a believer in Detroit. This brand grew out of the owner of Fossil, who created the Fossil product line. And I'm really intrigued in the whole notion of reinvention and rejuvenation in this country. We had a cover story at The Atlantic written by Jim Fallows called Comeback, which was about, you know, the reinvention. And I don't know if it's true or not, but you begin to see glimmers of a return of manufacturing, a return of certain crafts, and Shinola has been one of the sort of poster kids of that. And you think when you're traveling around the world, you sense that the factors, whether it used to be shale gas or, you know, other dimensions, are returning in any kind of serious way. The innovative, but also the manufacturing arm, which hires people, which is important to the middle class, that's coming back to the U.S. A new revolution in the U.S. 1776?
So the challenge, to some extent, but all of those factors you identify also have countervailing technologies that are pretty straightforward. So it's very popular right now to talk about like the Uber economy or the gig economy. What does this mean to jobs? Do we need a third classification of worker that's not fitting under W2?
Can I create an app that share my watch?
Yeah, but in the end, you can be an Uber for almost anything now. I'm going to need an Uber for diapers soon. And they actually make those. They have like cloth diaper service. They deliver right to your house. You talk about all of that, but calling it the Uber economy isn't focusing on what policymakers should be thinking about, which is, Uber in public comments has stated they expect to have self-driving cars on the street by 2018, 2019. Like, you're trying to think about, should we reclassify the particular role of these workers without focusing on, probably aren't going to need a lot of these workers within 10 years, right? And so I think in the same thing, you're talking about shale gas and all that, but that's not focusing on, the cost of solar is dropping much faster than Moore's Law, right? And so you're focusing on what does shale gas mean without focusing on the really interesting technology trend. And that's what we try to focus on, which is what are the really big trends we're investors, right, that you should be trying to get in front of and focus on. And so for us right now, the really interesting things are, like, how do you wire up smart homes with neighborhood microgrids, with distributed solar, with utility companies, so you can actually make this work, because all of the economics are starting to align right now to go, you can pretty viably start to provide neighborhood solar arrays at prices that are comparable soon without incentives with shale gas. So yeah, that's interesting, but what's really interesting is I think you're asking the wrong questions.
So I'm asking the right question, but let me put it this way. I think what you just described is such a powerful vision of what could come next. But almost everyone I know in the business that talks about the return to manufacturing identified until the price of oil fell through before that was the factor. So their vision is more limited. So I want to just say my vision is with you, not with them. But when you look at the factors that people are thinking about, there seems to be a lag effect, at least here in the East Coast, and certainly in Washington, D.C., of putting together the pieces that you just put together. If you go to Silicon Valley and you're at a dinner party, a regular dinner topic is the end of debt, right? How do we achieve the end of debt? I mean, you talk about the end of debt, and you're going to be sent to a party in Washington. Because it would disrupt Social Security.
Yeah, because we will soon achieve the end of debt, what are the implications? Just like that's a Silicon Valley dinner party.
Yeah, I mean, that's right.
So Alex, what are the implications?
That's not my question. It's just the reality, at least here, that they're there. And I guess my challenge to you is there, fundamentally a generational problem when you begin thinking about how to spread it? So I actually embrace technology and embrace the connectivity that you talked about. We did an education forum with Jim Shelton and frustrated people because, whether it's in health or education, and you think about what technology could do to crunch out variability in outcomes. That's what technology should be able to do. It shouldn't matter if you have a mediocre teacher or a great teacher, it shouldn't matter. There should be some dependable outcome no matter where you are that comes out. That should be obviously the goal. That's a normal conversation, topic at the West Coast. Here, it's, it starts to strike.
So let's unpack it. So yes, it's very, very interesting to me because you're right. When you have that conversation in Silicon Valley, it's all about geometric trends, right? So yeah. Right now the price of solar is competitive, but if you understand where the trend line is going to, we need to be already preparing for investing in a whole different meaning of electricity and how we power things. But you know what? There is a remarkable level of naivete oftentimes in those conversations in the Valley about, but oh, by the way, there are a tremendous number of very, very complex regulatory changes we also need to achieve in order to actually make all this work. When you're here, right, you have naivete in the opposite direction, right? You have everyone focusing on the implications of what has already happened without thinking where the puck is going to, right? Without thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead in terms of there are technology trends that are, I would be of the we are living in one of the most fascinating, exciting, mind-bending times. Like, all the science fiction I read as a kid is like coming true. All around us that isn't true yet, it will be soon, right? Like, it's incredible. And yet you don't see policymakers showing much level of creativity involved. I mean, it took Mark Warner's op-ed in the Post to even get the sort of gig economy stuff out there as a topic of conversation. You know, and it makes sense, right, that a senator who was previously a venture capitalist would be the one to actually start thinking about this. But like, so again, back to the idea of smashing these two worlds together. Washington's got a lot to learn from the Valley. The Valley also has a lot to learn from Washington in terms of achieving this future that I think has the potential to be a tremendous improvement from where we are now. It also has potential to skew into a horribly dystopian outcome. You know, let's hope that doesn't happen. In terms of the trends, going back to your point about manufacturing, though, I mean, I think if you're looking in terms of big overarching global trends, yeah, one of the interesting things is that, that was, New York Times, there's an article about it today, right? It feels like we are reaching the end of the sort of cheap labor dividend as a global economy, right? Like, you know, China is clearly not at the point anymore where they can drive growth just based on more peasants from the countryside coming into the factories. And yeah, you can maybe find more cheap labor in other little pockets, but, you know, even back to Africa, Africa is trying to leapfrog all those developmental models, and so you're kind of going, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of big implications? Well, it suddenly means that these trends are starting to balance more, and doing manufacturing in Detroit doesn't seem crazy in the way that it used to before, when the cost of labor someplace else was orders of magnitude less. Right. Now that's balancing out. But the other trend that I think we in the U.S. have got to pay attention to is that our fundamental export now as a country is innovation, which is great, but the rest of the world is catching up on that front very rapidly, right? And I use Apple as an example precisely because most people have this very unrealistic image of what's going on there, but you have pockets of incredibly well-educated people sitting around with broadband internet access, accessing Amazon Web Services and GitHub and every latest blog, and they are moving at an unbelievably rapid rate to replicate what we're doing here and figure out how to catch up. And in a lot of cases, they're hungrier than we are. And, I think back to the work that we, when Steve Case did with Startup America, which was kind of part of the origin story of 1776, like, in the US, we've got to focus on how do we get the whole country innovating again, not just Silicon Valley and New York and maybe DC and, Detroit's coming online, but like, you have an entire country that used to generate high-growth startups and new technologies, and now there's sort of an assumption that you have to go to Silicon Valley if you want to be part of that. And I think that's very, very dangerous for the country as a whole.
Which is why Steve says you can invent your garage in Madison,
which is
compute guy.
Look, why right now he's driving around in a tour bus from city to city, investing $100,000.
I get on that bus.
Yeah, because he
sounds cool, but being on it for 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, it's not
Where's
that?
So how do you get into 1776? If I had an innovative, you have a K Street fund, if I had an innovative K Street idea, how do I get into your shop?
So, I mean, if you have an idea, Steve,
I do. I told you I would not share it with them.
Yeah, so we try to be, on the one hand, extremely inclusive, and that we do tons of public events, and we really try to help teach everyone how you build these hybrid startups and all that. But we also have to be somewhat, we have to sort of define who gets into the community.
So who gets in, who doesn't? What's the dividing line?
The basic sort of acceptance rules are, it needs to be a idea with the potential for high growth, so something that can really scale. That generally means it's technology enabled, but not always.
So that knocks out the social innovators?
No, not necessarily. We do probably 2 or 3% of the companies we accept are nonprofits, but they need to be thinking in terms of a business that can really scale. Because that's what, it's not a value judgment, it's just that's what we're good at supporting. Other people are great at helping small businesses who want to create a great lifestyle for the founder. That's not what we do. The second is it needs to be a credible team. And so that means different things in different industries. So if you're trying to create an insulin pump that you embed in your pancreas that automatically measures blood sugar and releases stuff, probably someone on your team needs to be a doctor or have some background in medical stuff. Whereas for a lot of our startups in education, like, we get a lot of people who are like Teach for America fellows, and they got frustrated in the classroom, and they had an idea, and that's fine. But we look for sort of some credibility. And then the final is you need to be focused on an industry sector where we feel like we can help to give you a real competitive advantage. So we're not the people to tell you how to scale up your dating app, or how to help you take the next great idea for photo sharing. Because I'm sure there's yet another great idea coming for photo sharing. Like that's not what we do. Like, we're really good at helping you think through how to hack your way in real complex industries and big ideas.
So once they get past the Evan Burfield speed bump at the front end, what do you do for them?
I actually, at this point, we have a team that does, Don and I have a team that does that stuff. And
You want to blame the team?
Don and I get to approve all recommendations.
Okay.
And yeah.
So blame the team. Okay.
Yeah.
So they get by the team, and then so what does Evan give them? After they get it.
So the way the incubator program works is there's kind of two different components to it, and the way I like to think about it is it's almost like a next generation MBA program in terms of teaching you how to build these businesses while also helping you build the network you need for success. So think about it this way: you are a healthcare entrepreneur. Your origin story may have been you were a second-year medical resident. You got onto a hospital floor for the first time doing rounds. You were handed your, no joke, pager and clipboard and pen. And you're like, where's the technology? And they point to the electronic medical record system, and you're like, that looks like something a bank teller from the 1980s had. And you're like, yeah, that's it. Like, get to it. And you're like, oh, this is crazy. You have an idea, you have a friend who can hack, you create a prototype, you pilot it with your home institution, it works, and you're like, great, let's start a company.
So the friend you can hack part is interesting. So you need to know how to code.
You pretty much each startup needs some combination of someone who understands the domain and can sell and can hustle, someone who can build shit. Yeah.
It's like speaking German.
Hacker, hustler, designer, yeah.
Yeah. So you got to have a coder
or somebody who can rapidly prototype if it's a hardware startup, or somebody who can, if it's an educational curriculum play, somebody who can really create curriculum. And somebody's got to be able to do the building, somebody's got to be able to do the selling, somebody's got to be able to make the product elegant and beautiful.
So they bring that in.
So they come to us, right? So you're like, wow, this is an incredibly smart, motivated, ambitious person, right? They've got all of this stuff. But if you think about all the stuff they don't know, and all the people they don't know that they will need to, they have no idea how they take the particular insight they had in their institution and actually do customer development and product development to create a thing repeatably that people want to buy. They have no idea how to raise capital. They probably have no idea to storytell. In fact, going through medical school may have wrecked any ability to storytell they had. They probably actually don't know the business of healthcare. They don't know how to sell into a hospital. They don't know what sales cycles look like. They don't know about HIPAA compliance or FDA medical regulated devices. And they've got to learn all of that. And they got to learn it real fast. And they're going to have to get connected to experts in all those domains really quickly. That's our job. And so think of it as almost a sort of just-in-time, experiential, personalized learning program to say, great, we can get you connected with the experts that you need. We can get you connected with the people who can help you. We can teach you what you need to know, but you've got to be doing it as you go along, right? You got to be building your company, and you got to be learning while you go through that whole journey.
Now, Barack Obama visited you guys this year? Yeah.
Last July 3rd.
So he's been there. July 3rd, Barack Obama came by, and he doesn't code.
No.
Yeah, he does not know how to code.
No. I think he's probably taken like a...
He's good at the storytelling.
Yes.
He's a good storyteller.
He's wonderful.
No, yeah. When you have people like Barack Obama or myself or many people in the room come by, is that a help or a hassle?
Both.
Yeah.
Both, actually. And it's one of the reasons why we try to be pretty thoughtful about the people we bring by. And we spend a tremendous amount of time curating. And curating in both directions. So if a congressman who sits, or senator who sits on whatever the health committee is, comes by to visit, there's certain startups that may be really relevant to him that he's going to get and understand. And he could be useful to, and then there's a whole bunch that won't be. And so we try really hard constantly to make those matches in the right way. The example I always love to use, though, is we had David Stern come by earlier this year. And he met a bunch of startups. And one of them he met was Good World, and they were doing what startups need to do. They were hustling. They elbowed their way to get right to him, and they gave him their pitch. And Good World, for those of you that don't know, makes it super easy to donate to a charity on social media. So you can literally just type #donate in response to a tweet, and type in $50, and it'll automatically take $50 from your credit card and donate to that charity. It's really cool. So literally, David Cameron goes, wait a second. Well, I need to connect you up with this charity that I've been supporting in the UK because they could really use this. Turned to a staff member and said, make this happen. Staff member followed up. They got a big project with that charity. That charity said, well, actually, we need to connect you back up with our global organization in New York. And it turned into one of the big breakthrough customers for Good World. So sometimes these people actually do bring amazing connections. And generally, when the Prime Minister of the UK reaches out to charity and says, you need to work with this startup, we carry some weight.
It was not the Labour Party that got
It was not.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you think about where you're going next, and you are going next, you're going across the river. Is Angie Fox here with there she is. Angie Fox, I'm going to bring her the microphone for a second. Angie Fox tells me, rightly or wrongly, hopefully this is correct. We have it fact checked. Angie's right here. She's been working for 9 years to give a soul to Crystal City. Right? And then you're her bank shop is to bring soul to Crystal City, which I admit is a challenge. So just short form, how's that going?
It's going fabulously well because we've been able to attract 1776 across the river into Crystal City. The redevelopment project was really sort of the first wave. We're sort of the second wave, all these fun events. Anyone here done 5K Fridays? Anyone? So every Friday at 6:30 p.m. in April, you can run a 5K on the streets of Crystal City, free yoga, sipping salsa cups and pills. There's all this kind of fun,
Yeah, but that's all that kumbaya stuff.
But those are the kinds of things that those of us who are recovering techies, that's the world that I'm recovering
So let's talk about the kumbaya stuff for a minute. So if New York used to be like Crystal City, right, in some parts, but now they don't people. But look, I actually New York used to be pretty crappy. And Donald Trump came along and made it a great place. Right? So but you have people, if you talk to the innovators, Paperless Post, Alexa Hirschfeld, others, their big issue is how to create soul, life, a wonderful life experience for the people there. And they've been working hard with the Economic Development Commissions in New York, various folks. I've been very impressed, beyond the joke about it, of what New York is trying to do to sort of work very hard to change the life experience. We haven't gotten into that. I mean, you're on 15th Street, now you're thinking of Crystal City. I live down the street 2 blocks over. I mean, 14th Street used to be pretty crappy. You took your life in your hands if you walked on the street. So, what is the bulk of actually changing the contours and the way gravity works in the city to create a place where people want to be?
So let me give my sort of overall DC region kind of ran through it, and I think that'll tie into specific things. So you talked about reinventing in terms of people, right? The DC region has not had to reinvent for a really long time because we had a really, really sweet cushion, right? Which was basically federal contracting was going to grow and lobbying dollars were going to grow at whatever X% every year, kind of no matter what we did. And so we could have the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust, and it didn't really matter because right after we had a dot-com bust, we had a big expansion in defense and intel spending, it was all okay. And I really do think that trade is ending, right? If you look at the fiscal reality, whether it's sequestration or whatever the next budget thing is, the numbers just don't line up. You can't keep growing spending at 6 to 8% a year indefinitely, and this all makes sense. And so the DC region's got to adjust and reinvent and figure out what its next engine for its economy is going to be. Now, you have a big generational shift occurring where young people today don't want to be in Chantilly, right? They want to be in places where it's walkable, there is some sense of diversity.
They don't want a car, they want a Shinola bike.
They don't want a car, they want a bike. They want a Shinola bike. They want to be able to get places easily. They want experiences. And small businesses, that's so important to creating that vibe and that experience. So you look around you here, and this is not hard to sell if you're trying to tell startups why they want to be part of this. It's not hard to sell downtown San Francisco right now. It's not hard to sell Brooklyn, right? These are places that
It is
have...
hard to sell Crystal City.
So,
Yeah.
Northern Virginia.
It's getting better, right? But you're
So
we have a
here's-
10K run.
So here's the thing. So Northern Virginia
We,
and Maryland.
we have an airport that you can walk to.
Where you walk to, very convenient. But the point is, Northern Virginia, suburban Maryland, have to reinvent themselves. And it's interesting to me that you're not reading in the Post how bad most of the economic indicators are across Northern Virginia, as an example,
Right.
in terms of how urgent the need is to reinvent themselves. And I was having a conversation with one of the Arlington County board members who was saying it's a real challenge in Arlington because there's a tremendous sense of urgency amongst the leadership of going, you know, the commercial tax revenue base is going down like this, and everybody's, nobody wants to change.
So you're going to move there and save Virginia, and I buy it. I think it could happen. But you know, one of the challenges, I mean, not to be too bold. I mean, Terry McAuliffe is a friend of mine, but he's inherited a state that's failed to invest in itself.
Yeah.
So if you're not investing in yourself, if you're not expanding roads, if you're not bringing the infrastructure you need, it's hard. Coffee shops don't quite do it, even 10K runs. So if you rise, I mean, I guess I'm asking a question. Do you rise to a level of prominence, Evan, where you really become a political figure at some point, and you tell these states, if you don't invest in yourself, you're not going to get us?
So, we'll get back to this sort of, we've done a lot of interesting research that we are sharing with states and governments on this kind of stuff, the whole innovation that matters report. But going back to the basics of premise, so some people look at Detroit and see failed city, right? Other people look at Detroit and see, holy crap, there's lots of fascinating raw materials to work with. There's actually great human capital base for certain things. There's all this stuff. I look at Crystal City and I go, that's probably the easiest part of Northern Virginia to reinvent. And that process is already underway because frankly, all the BRAC closings and everything hit Crystal City first, so they've been forced to reinvent. And they're making it walkable, and they're adding in cool restaurants, and there'll be a Whole Foods soon, and there's a Sweet Green, and there's Taylor Gourmet, and there's chefs coming in, and it's actually getting pretty cool. The problem is you have the brand issue, right? You got to get people out. And Angie's job is to get people every day to come and take a look and be part of it and experience it. But I think it's a lot easier to create a dense, walkable, urban experience with live, work, play, all these things people want in Crystal City than in other parts. So if you're going to start anywhere, start in Crystal City, figure out how to reinvent Northern Virginia, and then take that template and take it across the region.
I want to go to all of you in a second. Yes, we're going to go to the way to the mic here. So go find folks that want to ask questions. But I guess my last question to you is, as you think about this arena of innovation, the data is bleak, where the rate of innovation, the rate of entrepreneurs that are coming into, creating new businesses, entrepreneurs were the job generators, small business were the job generators in the United States more than any other sector. That's declining. What do you think is happening in the ecosystem to erode that? I think you're remarkable and what you're doing is fantastic, but macro, it's not going well.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I promise to be
people ask all the time, why did we name what we're doing 1776?
I should have asked that.
Particularly ask us that when we're in the UK. They get a little bit offended. David Cameron, the only thing he would sign when he came, we actually have these old British phone booths, and he would sign one of those. There's nothing else that would touch it. So there were three things that happened in the year 1776. Right? The first is that it was the year that the first steam engine was put into production. Kind of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? Which basically transformed almost every aspect of our society and economy. It was the year that Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, or published The Wealth of Nations, largely defining the philosophical frameworks for modern capitalism and markets and entrepreneurship and all of this. And it was obviously the year that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, laying out underpinnings of modern democracy, but in the Declaration of Independence he says that when institutions no longer serve the needs of the people, it's the duty of the, I'm paraphrasing, the duty of the people to rise up and create new institutions. And those three things, it was fascinating to us, right? That in the year 1776, all three of those things happened because it was such an unbelievable inflection point between the old and the new. I think if you look around us, if we look around ourselves right now, it's hard not to believe we are at a similar inflection point in terms of a massive shift in new technologies that will transform almost every aspect of how we live and work and all of this stuff. And that is going to require changes in all of the institutions that define our lives. And so if you look across the country and across the world right now, you are seeing changes in all these directions for every bleak aspect you look at, right? I would challenge you to go sit around at iHub in Nairobi working with these amazing entrepreneurs that are like creating non-sovereign banks out of Bitcoin so that you can just completely remove your financial life from anything. You're going, this is mind-bending, mind-blowing stuff, right? And so I think that's kind of where you're at in the US, is you have, you talk about a generational shift. I think it's a generational and a mindset shift, which is, if you think about the number of people in the DC region who had a great life in one world, that world is ended. A new world is coming so much faster than people can get their heads around. And so it does impact things like, by the way, if you want Arlington to stay the way it was, that ain't gonna happen. One way or another, it's gonna change, and either you can embrace that movement forward or you can't. It's like, I think across the country right now, you have so many communities that are in various stages of this tension between holding on to a system that you can probably trace from World War II to today that basically says, if you do what you're told and you work hard and you show up, more or less everything's going to be okay. And that's just not the world that's emerging. I don't know what comes next, but it's going to involve a reinvention of all these institutions that define our lives. And so that to me is incredibly exciting, but I'm on one end of the spectrum of this kind of stuff. For a lot of people, it's scary and challenging, and they want it to slow down.
Let me open up to our audience. Yes, who we have here? Hi, yes. Right next to Seth, the other most powerful person in the room.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Hi, first of all, shout out to Detroit. I'm from Michigan, so I
There you
would be
go.
Yay! Use your softer voice.
Sorry.
Yes, then you're speaking to that guy way back there.
Well, so something that struck me was what you said about lawmakers, and we're thinking about, you said Uber right now versus you're thinking about 10 years from now, or shale versus solar. As someone who is involved in the whole lawmaking process, do you think that there is a discrepancy between the way you view time and the way that we view time, and the importance of that? Because to us, the present and the workers right now are as important, and we carry the weight of the past as well. Do you think that that's a tension that you can resolve, or?
That's such a good
It's a great question. Time. It's like almost like philosophical space-time questions. But how many of you guys have ever read the Black Swan book by Steve Clemons? Yeah, like it's almost not exactly time. It's like there's a framework around how actually things move and change that if you want to be an entrepreneur, or at least one doing these kinds of high-growth startups or venture capitalists, you need to get your heads around, which is there are very, very low probability events that have massively outsized impacts that are very, very hard to predict. And most of the stuff that goes on doesn't really have much impact because it sits in the sort of normal distribution curve that's highly predictable. And by definition, lawmakers are sort of focusing on what's the stuff that we can relatively confidently predict happening, whereas if you're investing or playing in this world, you have to be trying to guess what are the major transformative things that will change everything. What's interesting right now is it does feel like we're in a moment when a lot of these trends have been building for a while. They're all sort of coming to maturation right at the same time. I think a lot of it is just exposure and education. And one of the reasons why we do the work that we do to bring so many policymakers and governors and mayors and congressmen and senators and cabinet secretaries through and introduce them to the entrepreneurs is partially we want it to be good for the startups, but the other part is both groups have to learn each other's language and how they think about things. And so for us, it's education through exposure. And I think the more that we can get policymakers connected up with these startups, the better. The more we can get startups understanding if you want to transform the energy system towards solar and microgrids and demand response and all of this, you're going to have to figure out how that world works as well, right? You can't just build a better technology and assume it's going to change everything without some regulatory habits.
So great answer, but inadequate. If you were older, you'd have a slightly different perspective, if I may. The big moonshots that this country used to have were earnestly sought after. They were an amalgamation of very expensive resources with targets that were very hard to reach. You know, the giants of Silicon Valley like Xerox and Hewlett Packard, David Packard was the Secretary of Defense, were tied into the national security objectives of the country. And you've had a tremendous shift in where the bulk of, I'm interviewing this week, we're having the Washington Ideas Forum here in town. You're all invited. Who's going to the Ideas Forum? Who paid for your ticket? Yeah, you paid for your ticket, Senna did, yes, she's paid a big way. If you didn't pay for your ticket and you want to go and be my guest, C11 and you're welcome to be my guest. But I'm interviewing the head of DARPA, Arati Prabhakar, there. And one of my questions is going to be exactly her question is, what does DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, today do when most of the technology the country's thinking about, the cutting edge of that is less and less within the top secret government cauldrons of skunk works and whatnot, and being driven by people like Evan. It's a very different game today. So time has changed, the zone of innovation has changed, and if you were a little bit older, that's what you would back. But I mean, moonshots were different. Now you have the head of moonshots at Google, Astro Teller, you know, who has more consequence than somebody at DOD. It's a very...
But I think even that's changing. I mean, you've got, you know, Secretary Carter gave this big talk in Silicon Valley earlier this year, last year, basically saying, like, we need to find the next strategic offsets, the next radical game changers from a national security standpoint, and a recognition that we need to find a new source of that. If you went to Silicon Valley to do it, but the answer shouldn't be geographically Silicon Valley, it should be culturally Silicon Valley, wherever that's happening, you know, across the US. And I think that is changing slowly. I think it's changing on the part of Washington. I think it's probably harder to change that mindset because there's also a lot of skepticism.
Have you hung out with Mark Andreessen?
I have not. I hung out with him for an hour weekly.
Yeah, we had Atlanta, right? We had an Atlanta event with Mark Andreessen. Wasn't that your shop?
Yeah.
Right? So we had Mark Andreessen with James Bennett there. And he tweeted something I'm really intrigued with. He says, most great ideas that people are making money on today were actually ideas from the past that people have dug up before. And so you don't have to be so smart coming up. You just got to go back and, you know, look and see and then bring it to you and, you know, get on the walking treadmill and come up with your idea, right? So, yeah, the walking treadmills, you got to go to 17th. Yes, you got another question over there? No. Yes. Yes.
So I have a question. I also work for a lawmaker from Detroit, and you have people investing in Detroit and a company like Shinola and yourself. What's going on?
Are there other companies in Detroit besides Shinola? No,
No, so you're saying like, you know, you have a company like Shinola and then you're going to sub-Saharan Africa and investing in different companies there, and you're talking about here, you're going across the river and investing in companies in Crystal City. And I was wondering, like, what efforts are your company making to reach out to communities across the other river, like the Anacostia River, where you also have people who are hackers, hustlers, and innovators there, and ideas there, and what efforts are you making to reach out to those communities?
So let me answer the specific question first, and then let me talk a little bit about how we engage the community. So the specific question is two different elements to what we're doing. So the first is how do you address the sort of supply of talent issue? How do you train the talent and skills they need? So we did a first pilot program in partnership with General Assembly, the city of, with Mayor Bowser here, Capital One, Microsoft, and Mentor, I think, supported it. And then we basically, you know, so the General Assembly program, you can know nothing about coding, you go through 15 weeks of training, and you walk out and they have like a 96% job placement rate to get you a job as a entry-level coder or UX designer, and you make like a pretty good wage. Challenge is, right, that program costs like $12,000. So it's great for some people. What we did is we went and did a series of workshops in partnership with the ARC in Ward 7 and 8, where we got about 30 students together, we introduced them to all the concepts, sort of brought some more entrepreneurs in to talk about how they apply these skills. We're able to pick, I think, 7 students that received full scholarships, living stipends, all of that, mentorship support, and they are just this month starting their ARC through the General Assembly program. And they've got guaranteed internships with Capital One and Microsoft and MedStar. If that works, one of the things we'd love to do, and I know Mayor Bowser would love to do, is really to figure out how do we scale that program up do a lot more of that. And I know we'd love to figure out how to do similar things in Arlington or Virginia. The second is how do we really help identify entrepreneurs, connect them with problems from communities like that. We're going to be announcing some fun things here in the next few months with the city, specifically designed to do that. In terms of places like Detroit, the way we focus globally is we see tremendous benefit in creating what we sort of think of as a global mesh. How do we connect that startup in Harare up with that venture in Detroit? How do we connect that startup in Detroit up with that investor in Silicon Valley? And that's sort of the way our brains work. And so that's a massive and probably intractable problem if you try to attack it directly. The way we do it is by empowering it, by bringing our network to try to help support the people that are organizing those local communities already. So almost every city around the world has some sort of startup hub similar to 1776 that's trying to organize all the local resources. We partner with all of those around the world. We have our campus in Washington and now Arlington and Silicon Valley, and we'll be announcing some more stuff coming soon. But outside of a very small handful of cities, our goal is to figure out how to bring this sort of global mesh and connect up with people that are doing the hyper-local organizing. So that the key is who are the people right now that are doing all that grassroots, ground level work in Detroit, and how can we help them?
In 1776, when someone fails, you have sort of a bye-bye party.
No, because they're almost always, think of it as this giant churning recycling account.
So they leave, you give keep on and say, when you got an extra big idea coming
No, sometimes they leave, but a lot of times if their company fails, they roll into the next one, or a lot of times they join one of the companies that's really scaling and taking off. And you see that over and over again, is that, startup life, narrowly defined, is highly, highly risky. Collectively defined, if there's a community around it, the odds are very good that the community is going to grow over time. And so a lot of it, and the reason why we make so many peer connections and all that, is because even if your company doesn't fail for 1,000 reasons, you're validating yourself and you're connecting up with other people whose companies may take off.
Interesting. Allie Weinberg of ABC News, and she's a killer accordion player.
I'm sorry for this time, but Evan, I wanted to ask you about, you talked a lot about reinvention tonight, and I want to ask about one institution that I think can benefit, and I think everybody here might agree that can benefit from some reinvention, which is the institution of governance. And my question for you is, you talked a lot about the sort of harmonious interplay between startups, local and state governments, and what both can do to facilitate a more harmonious interplay between the two of them. But there have been recent studies, one by Pew a few years ago particularly, that shows a record number of young people don't want to run for office as a means for social good. So I'm wondering, do you see that as a problem? And if so, how do you recommend reinventing governance so that it becomes an attractive channel for young people?
Well, that's a small question. Yeah, look, I did not mean to imply that there's a harmonious interplay between startups and government and all that. It's more while you have startups that are trying to build these ways to do things, you have legacy institutions that are in various stages of realizing they have to reinvent themselves as well, right? So it's been fascinating, with hospitals, utility firms, how quickly they've shifted from, we don't need to make change, to, whoa, wait a second here, we've got to figure this innovation thing out. And so a lot of it for us is trying to identify those legacy institutions that are wanting to lean forward on this stuff and do want to engage. Yeah, it's absolutely a problem if people don't want to participate in government, but I think, we have this debate that I think is deeply counterproductive being here in Washington between the idea of more or less government, as if all government were created equal and it's just a matter of amounts. I look around and I see many, many problems in this country, around the world, locally, that desperately need a very effective government to be solving them, and yet we don't have a particularly effective government. Right? That's my perspective as an entrepreneur. So the question is, how do you reinvent this stuff? How do you make it work? And I think part of it is, to your point, the sort of jaded skepticism, right, of young people today is not healthy and it's not helpful, because you're not going to solve a lot of these big problems without very active engagement from government. But I also think you need a recognition that an awful lot of the ways in which government has operated for several generations now have to go. I mean, it is mind-bogglingly frustrating sometimes to get basic things done with government, even when all the leadership is totally aligned or wanting to do it. And we just accept that as just the way it is, right? That's just okay. And yet government used to do really interesting big things. And so the question of, do you need to get different people running for office? You need to get them elected? You need to figure out, like, I talked to one social entrepreneur who was like committing their lives to trying to figure out the gerrymandering issue. And like literally going like state by state, county by county, and trying to figure out how to get states to do what California's done. Like, having people thinking creatively around, that's not a problem that we try to solve, but you need people doing that so that there are viable counterparties. I don't hear, it's very out of vogue right now for either side of the political spectrum to acknowledge that one, government's deeply broken, and two, we desperately need to go fix it.
I just want to offer an editorial, well, not an editorial comment. You know, I think that what we're hearing today with Evan is so important. And I originally began going to 1776 with the spirit and skepticism that I went when I went to China and lived in Dongmen inside the Cycling Road. That it sounded good, but people must not, be restricted. So you go around China, everyone's choking on the air. I'll tell you privately, their world sort of sucks in some ways. You go around 1776 and you go talk to the innovators that are there, and it's a remarkable story of people that are doing things that are profoundly interesting in different ways. They've got your trust, they're doing it. It's an incredible zone that I can't quite believe is down there on 15th Street and going to Crystal City. I mean, it's a remarkable thing because you begin thinking about when you go talk to these folks, and I sneak around when your team isn't watching me and talk to the folks. I walked on the treadmills with people who were working on the treadmills, and I just want to give you just a hat tip, because I think that when you think about what needs to be changed in the country, or you think about the Shinola, I think we're here at Shinola, and what they're doing in Detroit, it's really, we're so prisoners of conventional wisdom that innovators, in a way, defy that and see gravity very differently. And I just want to commend you, because I think that very few people are able to jump at that, take the risks, the credibility, gather resources, and go into the most risk-averse city in perhaps the world, and become a promoter of risk and doing things very differently. So I want to thank you, Evan Burfield. It was a really, really remarkable conversation.